Oops, sorry. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Shai Schmelzer. Also on the line is Blaine Carter. We're both from the product management team for Oracle Visual Builder. And in today's session, we're going to cover the new features in Oracle Visual Builder. We haven't had this session for a little bit, like a couple of months now. And over the past half year, we actually released 3 versions of Visual Builder, starting from a version in December, another one in March, and now the latest one was basically the end of April and the beginning of May. So what we'll do today is we're going to cover features specifically from the last 2 versions. So that would be 2404 or 2407. But again, if you haven't looked at the what's new features in previous versions, definitely go and check those out. During the session, if at any point of time you have any questions, just post them on the Q&A panel of this session, and we'll try and answer them during the session or maybe towards the end as well. So the latest release is release 2407. It started rolling out at the end of April. Basically, by this time, you should have this version in your cloud instance. So no need for you, of course, to do anything. The version is automatically applied to your instance. 2407 is a version that is released specifically for the Visual Builder Studio environment. So you get the design time features there in Visual Builder Studio. If you're using just a Visual Builder runtime instance, or if you're just using the instance that come with Oracle Integration Cloud, what you would have right now is 2404. Of course, you could and you probably should use Visual Builder Studio as the design time deploying on top of your Visual Builder or OIC instance. That would give you the best development experience, much better integration with Git, with CI/CD, and of course, the latest features. So in release 2407, we have new set of runtime libraries. That's Oracle Jet got upgraded to version 16 in this release. And the Oracle VB runtime matches the version, it's 2407. One thing to keep in mind, as always, we have our upgrade policy. We give you 4 releases that we still support in the visual design environment that you can keep doing and using and developing visually. But if you're on an older version of our runtime and Jet libraries, then you have an upgrade button. Press the upgrade button for your application and get them to the latest version. We basically, our upgrade policy is 4 releases, which basically gives you about a year. Those are 4 releases of Visual Builder Studio, so 2 releases of the Visual Builder runtime instance, okay? What you should do is update to the latest version. And in this session, we'll kind of explain why you should be using the latest version. And it's basically because you get better features. So one of the things that we introduced actually in 2404 is a dark mode design time. So this has been a frequent request from developers. Dark mode is all the rage right now in terms of user interface. It allows you to have a better contrast in a lot of cases. A lot of people like it because it's less stressful on the eyes. And in general, a lot of people prefer this type of user interface. So in 2404, we released our design time in a mode where you can actually switch to a dark mode. One thing that we now added in 2407 is also an option to have a dark mode in applications that you build in Visual Builder. Okay, so you can now at the application level use a switch and switch the default template that we're providing for a new application from being light, which is what you're seeing on the left, to being dark, which is what you're seeing on the right. Now, one more thing that you can do is you can actually have the end user decide on which view they want to see for their application, light mode or dark mode, or you can even have it conditioned based on the operating system that and the setting in the operating system that the user has. For example, if they're using Windows in dark mode, it would show the applications in dark mode. The very nice thing here is that you don't have to do anything in order to get this functionality in your new application. You don't need to design your application differently. All you need to do is turn on one flag. So let me show you how this actually looks like. We're going to look into a Visual Builder over here. So again, this is in Visual Builder Studio. you're going to have a news banner here, usually telling you what's the latest version. So we're in 2407 right now. One thing to note is you can close the news banner. This news banner will pop up again when we release the next version, so just keep that in mind. But until then, it would be closed. We're working on a workspace here. We can open the workspace in a new tab. The workspace is basically the way that we design our applications. It, again, gives you a local copy of your application from the Git repository, so you can do changes without affecting other developers who are collaborating with you. And once you're happy with those changes, you can push them to the main Git repository and share them with the rest of the team. So that's one of the reasons you should work, especially if you're working in teams of developers, with the Visual Builder Studio and the workspaces. So over here, we have the application we saw in the slide before. It's basically showing us the latest movies that are out there. And one of the things you would notice now, if you go to the application settings over here, is you have the option to switch the theme. So you can say, hey, I want a dark mode, or you can say, I want a user choice mode. And you can also specify the default theme that is going to be used in an application. If you then go over back to the application now, and you're in a live mode, over here, we'll add a menu item to the top here, which allows you to switch between light, dark, and operating system. So this is the user choice option here that allow the user to decide how they want their application to behave. So if we run this application right now, this user option is up there, and the user can switch the application while it's running to decide how they want it to look. And again, we only built this application once. We didn't do anything manually in terms of having to change style sheets or stuff like that. The other thing that you would notice there is that there's an option there for you to override the theme for each one of those, to change colors and things like that. But this is the default out of the box experience. You can look at movies, you can click on a movie to get a little bit more information about this movie. And this would navigate you to another page where you can see the further information. As a runtime user, you can go over here and say, hey, I want to see this in a light theme. And then the application changes and looks in the light mode. And if you go back, this page also looks like it is in the light mode. So this is, again, out of the box for you for new applications. So it's not built, we don't have it as a way that you can apply it to an existing application, although you can probably reverse engineer what we have done here and copy the artifacts into your application. Okay. So that's one of the new features in here. So this new feature also leverage the new default template that we have for an application. And one of the things we added in this template is a page header fragment over here that we added the ability to customize the title as well as have an action slot over here. So when you're creating a new page in an application like that, for example, if we do a test page over here, okay, you would notice that in the page at the top, you would have a section here, which is the page header. This is coming from a fragment here called the page header. So you can also change that fragment, and this would affect all the pages that are using this. And this fragment has one parameter, which is the title. So you can say, for example, this is our search page. And there's a place here for you to add buttons. Okay. So usually when up until now, when you drag and drop things, the buttons would be down at the bottom. That's totally appropriate, but a lot of customers are now preferring to take buttons and put them up here at the top. And for example, have a search button up here. So this is a little bit more aligned with our Redwood designs, but this allows you to do it in non-Redwood template on your own application. And then, of course, you can go ahead and design your pages to do whatever you want, continuing to development as usual. And again, as you can see here, we're in the dark mode for the application. At the tool itself, there's a theme level selection, which allows you to switch the whole tool to be dark mode and work this way. So that's another new thing here. It's the page header, which is part of the fragments that we provide for the default layout of your application. One other thing that you would notice now that we're using Jet 16 in Visual Builder Studio is the appearance of a whole new set of components called the Oracle Jet Core Pack components. Okay, so those would be in your UI design. Okay, so if I clear the filter over here, I can hide the structure pane, and we can scroll all the way to the end. From here, you can see in early access, you can see a bunch of components, right? Now, if you look at the components, it's the same names as existing components, okay? So you have an input date, and you have a checkbox, and you have a button, etc. So what's special about those components? So those components are going to provide you with faster rendering and performance on the client tier. Okay, those components underneath are using the VDOM architecture, which is a new architecture for how we build the new set of Jet components. These components are basically alternative to existing components. So you're not going to get new components here per se, but you're going to see the same name for existing components, but with a new implementation. Okay. Now, the nice thing is that those components can coexist with existing components on your page. So you don't have to switch. You don't have to use these components. But if you want to, you can start to use these new components instead of the old components or in addition to the old components. Okay. Some of the components also have new features that weren't available in previous versions. So on our blogs, for example, on the Visual Builder blog, you will find an entry that covers the new multiple select components. This one over here, select multiple. It has some new functionality that it allows you to do, so very nice to use. One thing to note is all of those components are now under early access still. And the main reason that they are under early access is because they don't support theming. So right now you can't change their look and feel. They come with the default Redwood look and feel. So as long as you're using the default Redwood look and feel and you're happy with it, feel free to use those components. If you're using other styling on top of Redwood, okay, if you're changing colors and stuff like that, these components won't allow you to do that. So don't use them yet. We're going to introduce theming in a future version. But if you're building an application that is based on Redwood, we highly recommend starting to use those components. They should be at this stage mostly on par with the existing component. They might be missing a feature or two from earlier components, but again, in some cases, they might have new features. If you want to learn a little bit about how they are differ from existing components, you can go to the Oracle Jet documentation, of course. There's a whole section about the Jet core components. And for each specific components, you would now find a migration section that explains the differences between the old one and the new component over there. So again, at the end of the day, you get a set of new components that are going to create a much faster rendering experience on the client. One thing to note in terms of if you're tuning your application, client rendering is usually not the bottleneck in application performance. Usually it has to do with the REST services, the backend that are slow. But you would still see some change in performance and improvement by using those components. Beyond new components, another new thing that you would see in 2407 is a new variable data type called buffering data provider. Okay, it kind of adds to our data provider components the SDP and ADP. Now you have a BDP. Okay, so we had the array data provider, and now we have buffering data provider, for example. So the main use of the buffering data provider is for cases where you have editable tables, okay? So up until previous versions, you might have implemented editable tables using array data provider. And the downside of an array data provider is that it fetches all the information and then you edit it. So it basically gets all the rows from the table and populates the table, and then you can edit it. This is different from SDP, where an SDP, for example, can do pagination and gets records as you scroll down. Now, buffering data provider is basically a data provider that sits on top of an SDP and allows you to leverage the pagination and fetching as needed. And then the BDP stores the records that have changed in a way that allows you to then take them and submit them as one transaction over as a batch transaction to your backend. Okay. So for scenarios of editable table, this is going forward our recommended approach for implementing it. Okay. If you already have something working with ADP, again, no need to change that. But if you're building new editable tables, we would recommend you would use buffering data provider. We have an example of how to do that on our Visual Builder cookbook. So just search for BDP over there and you'll find the example, step-by-step instruction, and of course, downloadable example that you can examine the code and know exactly how to use it in your environment. Several versions ago, we introduced the concept of JavaScript action chains. Again, this is an alternative and a new approach compared to the JSON-based action chains. JavaScript action chains have a lot of advantages, as the key one being the ability to actually set breakpoints in them, and it's a much more native debugging experience for developers. The development is still purely declarative. You can drag and drop to position items and logic and create logic blocks very easily. And you can switch also to the JavaScript view of the code and actually edit JavaScript code directly. One of the things we are constantly doing on the JavaScript action chain is improving the development experience. This is a lot of what we'll focus on. We're actually analyzing a lot of the code that is being done by our internal developers that are building our own Fusion application. We're looking at how they're using the action chains, and then we're improving, trying to make it as simple as possible, reduce the amount of manual coding that they need to do, and make things clearer. So this is a list of some of the things we introduced in the JavaScript editor. One of the things is declarative if. So if you're creating an if statement and you need to build a condition, you now have a declarative way to define this condition. When you're creating an assign variable now, when you're using this section, it's very easy to create a local variable. When you have multiple assign variables, which we noticed a lot of people have, we kind of collapse them into code blocks. So they are not separate instances, therefore occupying less space on your visual editor. We now have a quick option to duplicate a piece of code. So you can just click on something, right click on it and say duplicate action. We create another version, another copy of that action. So again, just like copy paste in your code editor, but very nicely done inside your declarative editor. And we made it easier to drag and drop actions or things like that into an else part of an if-else section. We made it possible to take a local function that you defined in an action chain, and if you find that it's reusable, you can right-click on it and turn it into an action chain that you can call from other places as well. So not just from that action chain, but from other action chains as well. The way that parameters to actions are displayed has been changed. So now you're going to see it in an easier way in your visual editor. We added a bunch of actions for manipulating arrays and strings. Okay, so very common types of variables that have a bunch of built-in functions, and now you can just drag and drop it into your page. And we started to introduce what we call the summary view of action chains in the declarative view, which allows you to get a better high-level overview of actions. So let me show you some of those capabilities in Visual Builder. So if we have here, for example, we'll just define a little variable. Another change, by the way, this little icon over here changed to represent variables. So just if you were looking for the little drop-down arrow that was there before, now we have something that is a little bit clearer to see. And so let's say we have a search variable over here, right? And then we have the button, and on the button we want to do something, so we're going to create an action over here, right? So one of the things you might want to do is you might want to keep the search value in a local variable in your action. So you take an assign variable action, put it in here, and you can call, for example, local variable. Okay, so just by typing the name of a variable, we're actually creating this variable. You can then set the type for the variable, okay? And you can set the value, okay? And the value again can come from the list of variables that we have here, right? Like that, okay? So this is one option. Then if you would take another assign action and you put it below it, usually or until 2407, it would have created another complete box like that. But now when you drop it, it puts it into the same box. So you can now define another variable, okay? And again, you can then say, okay, now for search variable, I want to put in the value ABC over here, for example, something like that, okay? And again, you can take another assigned variable and put it in here, and it would add another one. You can delete variables. You can also create assigned variables directly from here. So you can say here, there's another variable I need to create, and this one maybe is an array, okay? And I can put it over here like that, okay? So all of this is, of course, at the end of the day, just generates code like that, where you can set values directly also in code if you want to, okay? Like that. If you would take, for example, an if statement and put it up here, okay, and then maybe you want to call a REST endpoint, you can now take the REST and drag it, for example, into the else option directly. So makes it very easy to drop a REST in the else, take another REST call, put it over here, for example. Okay. And maybe you then like to duplicate this whole if structure. You can right click on it. There's of course the surround if, surround try catch if you need to. And then there's the duplicate option, which creates another version of it, okay? And then you can of course take this and just drag it over into another place. So again, very easy to structure things along here. If you scroll down over here, we have a bunch of new array methods. So if you have an array and you need to do something on that array, for example, if you need to push a new variable into this array, you just place it over here. You specify, here's my array, and here's the element I want to push into it, okay? Similarly, you can do operation on strings. So if you need to find the index of something in the string, you can bring it over here, say which variable you're looking to search, what string are you looking for, hello, and from which position, and this would put it into the index variable over here. And of course, you can change the name here to position, and this would put it here. And again, if you look at the code that is generated for this little thing, it's basically this little code over here that invokes a string function on another variable, okay? So those are some of the things that you can now do over here. Up here, by the way, if you hover, you will be able to see summary view versus full view. And again, if you look, for example, in the details that we're seeing here for the position assignment, if we now click on summary, we just see the main point of it and what it does, or we can see the full view. So this helps you a little bit if you have a lot of code in your action chain to collapse the view and see things a little bit more clear. So those are just some of the changes we introduced into the JavaScript action area. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show you. Let's delete this section just so we'll have a little bit more space here. If, for example, I had this if statement in its own function, okay, so I have a little if function over here that I'm working on, and then I found out, hey, this is very useful because over here I'm also doing a REST call, and then I'm having some a function that I'm calling from here or things like that. Actually, let's do another assigned variable after here, like that. Okay, maybe I found out, oh, this whole function is very useful. I can right click on it and say convert function to chain. Okay, and now I have my own if function chain. I can of course change the name, and then I can call it from other functions. So in my button action, I would now have, for example, the ability to do call action chain over here, and I would call this if function from here. So this is, again, kind of refactoring functionality available for you in the JavaScript editor, allowing you to create reusable pieces of code in an easier way. Right, let's go back to the slides. There's a bunch of other enhancement in Visual Builder, things like when you're working with quick starts and you're, for example, creating an edit page from a table just by clicking on a table, going to quick start and say edit, create an edit page, we automatically know which business object to pick. So we automatically pick the correct REST service, shortening the number of steps in your quick starts. When you have page parameters, but you also have app level parameters in your page, you can click this little icon here and set values for parameters. Now you can set the values for parameters in all the levels. So from your fragment, for example, to the page, to the flow, to the application, you can set variables for all the parameters that are relevant for the specific page you're working on. The live design switch button, which is the command button on the Mac and a control button, I believe, on Windows, is now only effective when your mouse is inside the visual editor, which helps a lot with shortcuts for the button in other locations. You can now reopen closed tabs, and the whole experience of creating actions from events also is simpler. So let me show you some of those things. So again, you were working on something, you close the tabs, and then you say, oops, actually I need it back, so you can reopen the closed tabs, just like in your browser. Makes it very easy if you lost focus to regain it like that. We talked about the ability, let me see what else. Oh, live view. If we are on a page in design view over here, there's a button that you can press again, and it switches to live mode, and you can then press on stuff and get the functionality working here. Note that if I press this button only when I'm over here, this becomes green. If I'm outside with my mouse, it wouldn't become green. Okay, so it really depends on where the mouse is. Only when you're inside here, when you press the button, it would change over. So that's another nice thing. And there was something else. Streamlined creation of events. So for example, let's say I created an event, a custom event that I can fire from different places. I can right click on it and say create event listener, and immediately go over to where I can code or basically drag and drop the things that I want to happen when I create this event. All right. One other feature that was actually introduced in 2404, but it's very important that everyone that is not using Visual Builder Studio would know about it, is the ability to optimize your application directly from the Visual Builder design time in VB and OIC. So this is something that people who are using Visual Builder Studio have been getting automatically done for them by our packaging step in the CI/CD pipeline. But now, even if you're not using Visual Builder Studio, if you're still using the design time in VB or OIC, there's an option at the application level settings to optimize your application when you're doing staging and publishing. So when you click on this one, we would optimize your application. Optimizing is basically taking the application and compressing it, minimizing it, causing it to load much faster. There's a blog about this. If you just Google VBCS optimization, you'll get to a blog that explains and shows the difference. At the end of the day, it makes it so your application loads much faster on the end client browser. Okay, so this is definitely something you want to do for all your applications. So if you have older applications that haven't been optimized, open them in Visual Builder, go to the settings, check the checkbox, and republish them. Okay, this would get you a better performing application for your end clients. There's another type of optimization that we're now able to do. This does require you to run things through the Visual Builder Studio and the build pipeline, and that's optimization for search engines. Okay, if it's important for you for external search engines like Google and Bing to find your pages in your application, we can now pre-render pages for those little robots that go around and basically inspect your pages. Pre-rendering would let them know what the pages do. It's especially useful if you have a website map of your pages and you want those crawlers to go around and understand what your pages are and index them. Okay, so again, there's a section in our documentation explaining exactly how to do this. This is probably not very important if you have applications that are running inside your organization, inside your company. But if you have anything that is customer facing, any portals that you build, support sites or stuff like that, this is something that would probably help your site to get higher ranking in the search engines. So look it up. All right, another new capability in Visual Builder is support for process automation. Okay, so process automation is kind of a new service from Oracle. It kind of replaces or provides an alternative to the Process Cloud service. And the Oracle Process Automation service is kind of a new version, same concepts. It's meant for processes that are usually involving people, processes that require some action from the people and from also some aspects of automation of processes. So for example, if you have a salary approval process or a travel approval or any other type of approval process, or if you have processes that involve multiple steps of getting various systems to do stuff, and then someone needs to click a button to do something else or to decide what to do, this is what Oracle Process Automation is all about. And one thing that we now are able to do is create a new backend that maps to process automation instances. Process automation comes either as part of Oracle Integration Cloud Gen 3 or as a standalone service. So if you need a process, definitely look at this as a solution for implementing this. And then inside Visual Builder, if you go now over here under services, there's a section here, of course, for backends, and you can create a new backend. And when you create a new backend, one of the types of backends that you can create now is process automation. Okay. Previously, you were creating things with Process Cloud Service. Previously, by the way, in order to work with Process Cloud Service, your VB needed to be part of the same OIC instance as process automation. Now, this requirement is no longer in place. You can have separate process, separate VB instance, and you just pick up a process automation instance and you create a backend. Once you create the backend, then when you go into services and you create a new service connection from a catalog, one of the catalogs that we will be able to show you, for example, is this process automation. And when you click on this one, we'll go over to the process automation instance, and we're going to query to see which applications and which processes are in there, allowing you to create a connection to them. So if you, for example, needed a salary approval process, okay, you would be able to see, hey, I have multiple applications here and I can choose each one of them and then select which action or which process I want to do here, and then create the backend. When you click create, this will create a bunch of endpoints that allow you to basically work with the process, start the process, okay, create a process, get a list of the processes, get instances of the process, and much more. And then you can work with it just like any other REST endpoint in your application. Again, we have a blog entry on the Visual Builder blog that gives you step-by-step instructions, shows you a demo, gets you a lot more information on how to use process automation from Visual Builder. And of course, it's also covered in our documentation. So those were some of the features that are in the design time for building application in the tool itself. Beyond that, we added features also to the project part, so managing projects, lifecycle, and things like that. Let's talk, for example, about some of the features in the merge request area. Merge request, again, if you're working properly with Git and you have multiple developers working, each developer is working on their own branch of code. Once they're done with the changes that they did and they are happy with the results, they're going to merge this and request a merge into the main branch or into your development branch, into the area where all the developers are getting their code from. So one of the things we introduced now is the ability to have templates for those merge requests. So when you're creating a merge request, Some organizations have specific information that they would like you to provide, and we now have the ability to define a template at your project level for those merge requests. You can actually define multiple templates over there. You can also then assign this merge request not just to individual people, but also working with groups. So for example, if your project has different groups, for example, groups of code reviewers, you can assign it to that group. Or if you have a group of people who are working on specific areas of the product, you can assign it to that group as well. We also allow you to revert a merge request with a single click. So this is kind of doing a rollback in your Git environment. When you're reviewing merge request, we have now a toolbar that allows you to do a little bit more of a markup environment to provide more focus or more formatted feedback to your customers or to your basically users or developers who are reviewing your code changes. And we also have an automated branch deletion after merge option. So you can actually set it at the branch level and say, hey, we want to delete branches automatically when the merge is complete. So again, just to show you a couple of those capabilities, if we were now to go over here into our area of merge requests inside Visual Builder, and we'll create a new merge request for our repository we want to take and put into our main branch the changes that we did in branch 1. And we can then choose the reviewers. And again, in the reviewers here beyond, if you have a group of reviewers, you would be able here to choose a group of reviewers if you want to. Actually, let me go back here and also add myself here. We can, of course, provide details over here. And in the description, you can see here's the template for how I'm supposed to say what was done, okay, for example. Okay, so this is a template that is built into this specific project and defines how merge requests should be formatted. Okay? And so, for example, I can say fixed the search, related issue, search not working, and wiki feature, I can point to my wiki.com page. Of course, this would probably be a wiki that is part of the Visual Builder Studio link. And then when I create this, this becomes part of what our reviewers are going to see when they are looking at the merge request. So now this merge request is in the queue for a bunch of reviewers. They can see my formatted text over here. Again, based on the recommendation of my team, this is how we define the template. And then when they are reviewing the code, by the way, and they want to give me a note on this thing, they can again use a formatted code here. Okay, so they can go, for example, and say this needs to be bold. This is actually a link to some URL, and we kind of help them like that. Oh, I should probably do HTTP that. And if I put a comment here, this comment is now going to be formatted this way, so people can click on it, they can see the bold, everything is in there. So again, making things a little easier while you're reviewing code for the changes in your application. Another area where we did enhancement in the project level is pipelines and jobs. One of the things we introduced in previous versions of Visual Builder Studio is the ability in a pipeline to have an approve step. So before, for example, you do a deployment to production, maybe you need an approve from some manager somewhere up the chain. So what we introduced in the latest version is the ability to have an expiration period for the approval. So what happens, for example, if you run this build pipeline, it gets to the approval stage, and then someone doesn't approve it. What we can now introduce is this concept of after, for example, 5 hours, we just failed the build jobs or something like that. Okay. The other aspect is that build jobs can have a protection. For example, we don't want this deploy to production to be something that everyone runs. It's now easier to see those protections when you're looking into the jobs, even if those protections are coming from generic rules. For example, we can say all our deployment build jobs have requirement, and then it's easier to see it over here simply by looking in the overview. We have a note that explains this. So again, just to quickly show you this, if you have a pipeline in your build environment in Visual Builder Studio, and this pipeline has an approve step, you can now right-click on the approve step, do edit approval, and you can set a duration before expiration. You can say, for example, if we've been waiting for a day and let's say 12 hours, we're going to fail the job if nobody clicked approve. So this is very easy to do, new functionality in the build pipeline. And then, of course, the third functionality of Visual Builder Studio is to act as the tool for customization for Fusion apps. And again, there's a lot of work being done over there to simplify the experience for users who are trying to customize and extend Oracle Fusion apps. One of the things we're constantly improving is the whole streamline experience of getting into this extension scenario. For example, now we automatically pick up the project that you're going to work in, okay? We now have extensions done by pillar, okay? So in order not to mix the extensions between, let's say, HCM and CX, those are going to be done in separate projects, okay? But we would automatically recognize the projects and also automatically would recognize workspaces over there and reuse them. If you already have a workspace that, for example, work on the HCM, we'll automatically map you to that one. Okay. And when you're doing an HCM extension. The dependency are also now broken by their pillar, making it easier to define and use a dependency. We make it now possible for you to request to join an existing project, and the app UI that you're creating, those extensions, are now by default going to show up in the Fusion menu. Okay, previously there was a little checkbox you needed to check. People usually miss that checkbox, so we now automatically check it for you. Of course, you can uncheck it if you want to hide it. By default, if you create an app UI extension, a new page, it would show up as a menu item over there. Another big thing that we did for especially business users who are customizing extensions, but of course it applies also for developers, it makes it easier for people to customize without needing to understand too much things. It's something we call express mode for extensions. And in express mode, things become a lot simpler. We remove a lot of the menu items from the regular Visual Builder Studio, and again, try to direct the customer to doing extensions in a simpler approach. We do a lot of enhancement over time on this express mode. In the latest version, we added, for example, list of values fulfilled, a bunch of standard function, again, declarative if, stuff like that, things that are also then appearing in the regular Visual Builder Studio, by the way. Made it easier to configure sections inside containers that are customizable, rule sets for configuring layouts, and publishing without actually running the full CI/CD. So that's an option that you can turn on your extensions that you're creating. So let me show you this experience. Let's see, hopefully I didn't lose my session over here. Okay, yeah. So this is Fusion application. There's a lot of Redwood pages over there now. I think it's over 1,000 pages in Fusion apps that are now Redwood based. For example, personal details, which is something that every HCM user has. This page is a Redwood page built with Visual Builder, and therefore a user, when they're using Fusion apps, can go over and edit this page in Visual Builder Studio. Okay. Now notice that we automatically go to a specific project and looking for a specific workspace in this project. Again, not having you have to look up, okay, where am I supposed to do this? We're directing you in here. And now when it's going to open, you're going to notice this is Visual Builder Studio, but it doesn't look like Visual Builder Studio exactly, not the format that you were looking before. And that's because we are right now in the Express mode. And you can switch to the Advanced mode up here if you want to, but let me show you how the Express mode works here. You see the page, and you can actually interact with the page in live mode. So you can actually go live and you can click on something and go and edit stuff over here if you want to. But when you're in design mode, and this is the page, and you, for example, see, hey, there's a section here called ethnicity, and maybe I want to hide this section in my application, I can go and click configure fields and regions. I can still see the preview of the page, but now it's kind of in a mobile mode. So over here on the left side, I can see the page and how it looks like. You can also hide that section. And over here in the center, I'm going to get my area for editing and working on the rules that control my user experience. Okay, so for example, I can define a new rule here. Okay, maybe this is the USA rule. Okay. And then in this USA rule, I can then design when is it going to be valid. So for example, when a user have a specific role, and again, this is list of values here. So for example, I can look up manager and I can say, hey, if this is account payable manager, okay, this is rule is going to apply. Same thing goes, for example, for countries. So I can go over here and I can type United, okay, and define, should do a search here. There you go. United, and I can define, hey, in cases like this, I want to apply this rule. Again, and you can add more conditions over here, more things that you want to have this applies to. Okay? And then in those conditions, you can say, okay, now that I have this condition over here and it's phrased as a nice sentence, I can then say, hey, you know what? There's areas on the page that I want to modify. Okay, you can also do filter here. So I can look up ethnicity and I can say, hey, you know what? This ethnicity, I want it to be hidden in this condition. Okay, so again, make it very easy to change things. Or I want to make it required. So maybe there's another field over here, maybe age, okay, or blood type. This needs to be required in this case. Okay. So again, those are kind of changes that would then apply over here, and you would see them at the runtime. And then you can click publish, and we automatically publish your extension to Fusion Apps. Okay. And again, this is all done in our Express mode. You can still switch over to Advanced mode. Advanced mode would let you do more advanced stuff, more deep integration with Git, also create new pages with App UI and design your own pages, but also all the changes that I did before are also available over here, just like they were before. Again, Express mode, much easier for business users, probably what you should be using when you're doing all the customization for HCM, for example. All right, and that's about it for what we had to cover today. This is not all the new features. This is the highlights of some of the key new features. So I always encourage people, go over to our documentation page on docs.oracle.com, look up Visual Builder Studio, and read the what's new. It's always useful to do. The other thing that this documentation does, it has links for more information about each one of those new features, so you can learn more. Then we take and we publish blogs that show you how to use new features on blogs.oracle.com/VBCS. This is our blog platform. This is the Teams blog. You can sign up to get updates from there as well, be on the feed from there. If you have questions about any of the features that we show today or any of the work that you're doing while working with Visual Builder, please join our Cloud Customer Connect forum. We have a forum for Visual Builder and Visual Builder Studio. A very active forum, a lot of people asking questions, a lot of people answering questions. So if you like to help your peers, go over there also and pick up some of the questions. And if you have experience and you know how to resolve those, answer those. By the way, it's also a great way to learn about things that you might run into later on. So please join our Cloud Customer Connect forum and ask your questions over there. Might be even faster than contacting Oracle support in some cases. And if you want to keep up with the latest things that have to do with Visual Builder, all the latest news, all the upcoming events, all the things that other users are posting on blogs and stuff like that. We have a LinkedIn group. So if you're part of LinkedIn, look up Visual Builder, do a search there. There's a group called Visual Builder. We have over 2,000 members already in there. We'll have to have you as part of that group as well. We post there about every new item, every newsworthy thing in the world of Visual Builder. We keep it very focused on Visual Builder. So please join us over there as well. And that's all we had time to cover today. Let's see if we have any further questions from anyone in the Q&A panel. See that Blaine has been working on answering some of those. Does BDP support look-ahead data pool? I'm not sure exactly what look-ahead data pool means, but BDP is basically working on top of SDP. So the data is fetched through an SDP and then put inside the BDP. The main goal of BDP, again, is to track records that you're changing. In terms of fetching and doing everything that the fetching has to do, it's exactly the same as what SDP does. Not getting those list of values in condition areas, you should be getting those. If you're not, please contact if you're working on HCM. Specifically, HCM has a forum which is called Visual Builder for HCM, and you can ask questions over there about extending HCM. If it's in other modules, please work with us on our forum and we'll be happy to help. Or you can, of course, contact Oracle support. Okay. Going to look if there are any other questions. Again, if you have any other questions, please post them on the Q&A right now. Right, and I'm not seeing any further questions right now. Again, thank you very much for attending today. Hopefully this has been useful for you, everyone, and we'll hope to see you in our next office hours. Have a great day. Bye.